issue where I'm next to you.
Welcome to a very special episode of the comicbookspeculation.com podcast, Nico Time. I am very pleased to have with us a special guest, the one and only
Me. I stopped being able to hear you. Wait, there you are.
Yeah, would you please introduce yourself to our live audience?
Yeah, now that I've made a total jackass out of myself, great. I am Frank Gogol. I am the writer of a few books you might have heard of. The first is Grief, which was nominated for a Ringo Award last year. And the second is, this is probably the one you do know me for, Dead End Kids. I'm a comic book writer. I write with Source Point Press, and I like writing about shit that's going to make you feel stuff and cry and be sad.
Thanks so much. So, Frank, I want to dig in, talk a little bit about your background in comics and how you were introduced to the hobby initially. When did you start collecting? When did you pick up your first book?
1997. I remember it is, it's called Spider Boy. It was one of the Marvel DC mashup Algamum comics. That mashed up Spider-Man and Superboy, and it was fucking trash. It was garbage. Very bad book. But I bought it off like a Rite Aid or a CVS spinner rack, and I was kind of a fan ever since. I didn't know a lot better then. And in terms of my personal history, comics were kind of an escapism for me when I was growing up. I had like a super garbage life. Like if you read Dead End Kids, there's a lot of stuff in there that sort of pulled right out of my own life. Both my parents struggled with addiction. I grew up in like a really poor part of New Jersey. And comics were sort of just like how I escaped and got away and, kept my head low and stayed out of trouble.
I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves because I know that the forthcoming title, No Heroine, is the book where you sort of touch on a lot of those things in a more personal and vulnerable way than you have in any of your prior titles. But I kind of want to do this chronologically. Because I really admire what you did. You broke into comics through a Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you did that?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of a backstory context for that. So I've always loved comics for as long as I've been reading them. I sort of fell in love with writing because of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I watched that way too young when I was like 9 in 1997, about the time I got into comics. And like sort of a lot of those things sort of coalesced for me, like growing up and getting into high school. I went to college. I have 3 English degrees, like a sort of standard bachelor's degree in English and 2 master's degrees in creative writing. I've sort of always known that I wanted to be a writer. It wasn't until about the time I graduated college I realized I wanted to write comics specifically. And then I was out of college for a few years. I tried to write comics and I got like these false starts and like I couldn't really get any traction, and it was just like it wasn't working out. So I stepped away from it for a long time. And then I was working at a really good job with a software company in New Jersey. They paid me really well. I was good at it. Like I had like a pretty solid life. Like I really had nothing to complain about, but it wasn't just what didn't feel like fulfilled doing it. So my then girlfriend, now wife, we were sitting at dinner one night and she said, what's going on? What's up with you? And I was just like, I'm just fucking tired of this. Like, it's doesn't make me happy. And she asked me what would make me happy. And I sort of thought long and hard about it. And, I eked out like, I'd like to make comics. And it's like, it was like a pipe dream answer. You know what I mean? Like it's like the little girl who says she wants to be an actress. Like only so many people get to do it and get to do it successfully. So it was just kind of like throwing it out there just to be honest, but not really expecting it to matter in the conversation. And essentially what my now wife said was, look, if that's what you want to do and you're not happy, take a year off, figure out how to make it happen, do what you need to do. We'll figure it out. And like, that's just the most kind and generous thing anyone's ever offered to me. And like, I resisted pretty hard because it was a huge financial thing. Like, we were living together, and, we had shared bills, and like, I freelanced during this year and stuff, and I had money coming in, but it was so much less than what I was making before that. And, just to have that kind of support and, somebody having my back like that, it was huge. So I took the year. I got involved with Comics Experience, which is an online sort of comics all-in-one school. You can do writing classes, you can do production classes, art classes, lettering classes, comic book law classes. Like, I mean, there's no end to like the sort of offerings they had. The school is run by Andy Schmidt, who is a former Marvel editor, former IDW editor. So Andy knows his shit. And I took the class with Andy, and I wrote a story in there called Embrace. It's a story about a little kid who's autistic and his dad, and sort of like a slice of life, day in their life kind of story about how they sort of deal with having to live with one another. And that ended up becoming the first of the 10 stories I wrote for Grief. And all the stories in there were sort of exercises in learning how to write a horror story or play with narration or, kind of setups and payoffs and stuff like that. And somewhere along the way, I realized, fuck, comics are super expensive to make. Like it's insane how unprofitable they can be, just because of the cost of making the product. But I noticed all the stories sort of fit together thematically along the lines of the 5 stages of the grieving process. So I sort of started writing to that and turned the book into the book that it ended up being now, with the chapter pages and the cover and everything that goes with it. And I threw it up on Kickstarter as a way to recoup some of the money, honestly. Like, we set a really low goal, $1,500. It was a digital only Kickstarter. And, I went into it saying, hey, if we make this goal on the last day and like squeeze by the skin of our teeth, that's a win. The book went live in April of 2017, and on the day it went live, in the first 10 hours, it was funded, and by the end of the whole thing, it was almost triple funded. It was wildly successful for what it was, and that sort of started me down this path.
That's fascinating. So quickly, SourcePoint Press picks it up.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So
can you talk a little bit about how that happened? I mean.
Yeah. This is actually one of my favorite stories to tell. So around the time I got involved with Comic Experience, Andy Schmidt, who I mentioned earlier, was looking for a publishing partner, so that way the school could do a sort of co-publishing program. They had previously had a publishing agreement with IDW, and books like Gutter Magic and Tet came out of that. But when IDW reorganized, they sort of cut all the sublines to refocus on the properties they had. So Comics Experience was left without a publishing program, and they were having a hard time finding a new partner. So Andy wanted to do a digital only Comixology, Comics Experience branded publishing line. So I submitted Grief for that, and I think I might be wrong, but I think it was the first book picked up for the line. And sort of that was that. And then that same year, I was sort of going to cons for the first time, trying to meet publishers and network and try to start, laying the seeds to get work one day. And I was at New York Comic Con in 2017. Walking around, I introduced myself at the SourcePoint Press booth to Travis McIntyre, who is the editor-in-chief and the president. Travis, for anyone who's not seen him, he's just this burly man, looks like Tormund from Game of Thrones, crazy red beard, crazy red hair, really gruff guy. And I walk up to him and I introduce myself and say, hey, I'm Frank Gogol. I am a comic book writer, and I'm just coming over to introduce myself. And we were talking for a few minutes, and he says, what did you say your name was? And I was like, it's Frank Gogol. He's like, I just read your book. I was like, no, you must be having a stroke. I didn't submit anything. And he says, it's Grief, right? He's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, we're going to pick it up. And I was, what? So, sitting there on Friday at New York Comic Con, yes, winning. But I thought I was having like a mental breakdown. Like, this person I had never met has said he was picking up my book that I never submitted. So I walked away and like started to hyperventilate for a few minutes. And, like, I thought I was losing my mind. But what turns out what happened is Andy was able to create an agreement with SourcePoint Press about having a co-publishing line with them. And he forwarded all the submissions from the digital line he was trying to put together to SourcePoint Press. And Grief was the first book they picked up for the co-publishing program. And so that's sort of how I got in at SourcePoint Press. And then Grief came out in April 2018.
Wow. Now, it didn't take too long before you had your next book written, right?
Yeah. So Grief came out in 2018 in April. I had written Dead End Kids, which would be my next book, in May of that year.
And you know, forgive me for the praise. I know sometimes that's harder to take than
tell me
personal insults.
Tell me everything.
But, yeah, it was the number one indie hit of 2019. I don't care what anybody says.
I believe that too.
Yeah, I mean, incredible success. Uniformly, I mean, praise throughout the community. I actually was talking to somebody Friday or Thursday evening, I can't remember which, about you being on the podcast, and they were like, "When are we getting more Dead End Kids?" I was like, "Buddy, the story's been told." I don't know if he's going to return and tell more, but I'll certainly ask him. Now, before I jump ahead to that question, can you kind of tell us about Dead End Kids as a property, how it sort of originated?
Sure.
I mean, that story is in large part written from a real personal place, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, can you share that with our viewers, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the sort of high level pitch for Dead End Kids is it's like Stand By Me meets the Hardy Boys. It's 3 kids in 1999 trying to solve their friend's murder. But sort of at the core, it's a book about this question: does the fucked up shit that happens to you when you're a kid sort of determine who you grew up to be, or does it have to? It's very much about childhood trauma and sort of very much based on the experiences I went through and that people I grew up with went through, and sort of just exploring that question. Like, I didn't have an answer in mind for the whole trauma angle, and I have my own personal beliefs about how that works, and the book sort of has its own ideas about how it works. But yeah, so that's sort of the high level of it. I started writing it, like I said, in May of, God, the years are all blending together now. May of 2018, and it ended up coming out in summer of 2019. And we're going to talk about No Heroine in a bit, but I was actually writing No Heroine first. So like, it's sort of, that's just a little behind the scenes of how comics works. Like, sometimes projects move ahead and stay behind. And but yeah, Dead End Kids, God, I don't even remember the question anymore. I ramble so much.
No, you're doing great. I just kind of wanted to know a little bit about that project. For those who will watch this that aren't familiar with the book, may have heard about it on comicbookspeculation.com or seen it, saw the prices move, were deterred from it now that copies of the set may have come back down to earth. Because everybody isn't buying 10 copies and hoarding them away, hoping that it'll be the next television deal, or at least some of them will have to discharge their copies to the market. Tell us a little bit about why they should pick it up. It's an exceptionally good read. And I think you did a little bit about that.
Yeah. I'll just to dig into it a little more. It's, like I said, it's talking about sort of childhood trauma, and it's wrapped up in this sort of crime story about a murder and kids trying to solve it. I honestly can't put my finger on like what ended up going like right. I think it was just sort of the perfect storm. Like a lot of people have praised the story. Like I wrote it, so I'm a little biased, but I think it's a pretty good story too. I think that it's like the design on the book is really eye-catching, and it helped people like sort of spot it on comic shelves. And that's something that I'm super interested in, is like package and design for comics. I think I busted my ass like getting the word out about it too. I did like 30 or 40 podcasts over the 2 months it was in pre-orders. I did
UD Unpressable Defects, the predecessor in interest to Comic Book Wars, had an exclusive variant. I think there were like 60 copies maybe. I just vividly remember Jimmy ripping covers off of the ones that didn't sell and shoving them into people's packages so that they could read them and keep their super exclusive book secret. And you can't even find a copy of the UD variant. But
Yeah, I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
I should have dug it out. I've got two.
Yeah, there were I'm trying to think. I think there were 25 different covers, including like sort of covers that were reused for like Virgin and line art versions, or the second printings. But like, I mean, I have most of them, but there are even a couple that I've never heard of. So like, I mean, like the book was wildly successful. People really dug it, and because the first issue sold out, like the only way we could get copies to people was doing like limited release variants for cons. Like I did a lot of those on my own dollar just so I could put the book in people's hands. And
wow.
I do a lot of shows every year. I think I did 17 last year. And yeah, just being able to put like, cause there's the copies of number 2 that would go unsold because people couldn't get number 1, and like it sort of defeats the purpose. So like I did everything within my financial and physical and mental ability to put the number 1 issue in people's hands and make sure they got number 2 and number 3. It's a story I really believe in. It's a story that's like super near and dear to my heart because it's so much based on my own childhood. But it's also like, that's how I make money. Like, that's how I get all my fucking paychecks.
Yeah, I don't want to jump topics too quick, but what you said, that I don't want to let it go by. You do better than almost anyone being present at conventions, being present in the community, making yourself accessible to readers and fans. You said you did 17 conventions last year, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, is that something that's comfortable for you or natural for you, or you just learned to do it anyway?
Sort of yes and no to all of those questions. I did my first convention in April 2018 for the release of Grief. It was C2E2. At the time, I thought that I was going to hate tabling. I thought I was going to hate hand selling and interacting with people. Like I'm not like a type A. Like I'm not particularly outgoing. But like, I mean, I don't mind talking to people. I'm not like an introvert either. But just the whole idea of that uncomfortable situation of hand selling and meeting like lots of people over 30 hours of standing on your feet across 3 days, I thought I would hate it, but I really do love going to conventions, and that's pretty unique for comic creators. Like I know a lot of creators, like they don't look forward to it and they sort of see it as a necessary evil, but I fucking love getting on that plane and like getting out there and like shaking hands and catching coronavirus and stuff. Like it's, I don't know, like I was really surprised at how much I liked it. But I don't know. It's essential. Like for a comic book career, like that's where the editors are. Like you can cold email editors all day, but until you can meet them in person and like they can put a face to a name, you're not going to get a whole lot of traction. And that's where the fans are. Like it's thousands of people in a room, and each one of them is a potential fan. And not being there doesn't. I mean, for those 30 hours, I could maybe write a couple more scripts, but who's going to buy them if they don't know who I am? So it's just, I like conventions. I really do. And I'm like we were talking earlier about Emerald City being canceled. I'm super disappointed about that. And I'm hoping that this whole coronavirus thing dies down a bit and conventions sort of stay on track for the rest of the year, because I'm trying, fingers crossed, to do 20 this year.
Wow. And you've been on the podcast circuit here recently, right?
Yep. Since January.
I mean, unbelievable, the willingness to kind of be out there, put yourself out there and do those interviews. I want to thank you again for being here. It means a lot to me, and I know it certainly means a lot to comicbookspeculation.com and our listeners and viewers. So the reason that you're doing the Media Blitz is because of your new book, which frankly looks
dope as hell. Dope as hell.
Oh, I cannot wait. You have shared a little bit with me about the title. I've read a little bit about the title. Will you talk to those who are unfamiliar about the title?
Yeah, absolutely. So No Heroine in a nutshell is imagine Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but if Buffy was like a real piece of shit, like recovering drug addict. The book's about a young woman named Kayla who is a recovering drug addict. She's homeless. She lives in a park, and she's like just not a very good person. It's to not to oversell like how terrible she is. She wants to be a better person, and she's trying, and she's doing her best, but she's really bad at it. So the story is sort of her journey of sort of figuring out like that being clean and not doing drugs anymore isn't the only thing that she needed to fix about herself. And then all she wants to do is like so many other recovering drug addicts is just make things right, like fix things with her family, be able to go back home, and sort of that all somehow through some windy path of misfortune leads her into a life of monster slaying. And this is very much a love letter to Buffy. I mentioned earlier, and probably several times already, that I love Buffy. It was one of my first storytelling sort of loves and awakenings when I was a kid. And only a handful of people ever will get to write Buffy. And I don't ever want to, say that when I'm 90 that I never got to tell my Buffy story, even if it wasn't on the actual Buffy title. But the book's a little more personal than that. We talked a little bit about how growing up, both my parents really struggled with drugs. A lot of the people I grew up with ended up being addicts, and I've seen a lot of this firsthand. And I wanted to sort of take a new approach to telling stories about people going through this kind of stuff, because in pop culture, we tend to see two things when it comes to addiction. We either see like these over sympathetic takes on it, where like these are people with a disease who aren't in control and they can't help themselves, and like we should feel sorry for them. And then the other end of the spectrum is that these people are like the worst, that they're criminals and they're incredibly demonized. And like I know from my firsthand experience that it's really gray in the middle. Like there's lots more going on there, and that neither one of those is like the whole picture. So like I said, Kayla's a real piece of shit. She's an addict, or she's a recovering addict, and she's hurt her family and a lot of people around her. But she's clean now, and she wants to do right, but she is struggling to figure out how to do that. And along the way, she's ending up making things worse. She's doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. And she's dependent on people around her to do the things for her that she needs to be doing for herself. I don't know. Kayla's definitely the best character that I think I've ever written. She comes most easily to me. She swears a lot, so like that makes it easy. This is a hell of a book, and I'm really excited to like get it in people's hands.
Yeah, so here's my question, I guess. I got a bunch of them, but is she a likable character? I mean,
yeah.
do you think about first one that came to mind was Han Solo.
Mm-hmm.
He's a scoundrel, right? Han Solo shoots first, but he was incredibly likable as that flawed and broken character. And I think that those are the characters that we kind of like. We love. We root for them in spite. Like somehow they're able to kind of inch forward and figure out how to do something right in spite of themselves.
Sure.
How did they do that? So is that kind of the character that you're writing, or no?
Yeah,
Am I apologizing for her too much?
No,
Is she less likable?
No, that's my approach to creating any character, and this is just my general preferences. I think that shitty characters are generally more interesting. Like very few people are on board for like just like the nice character who just kind of does like I'm watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine right now with my wife, and I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but there's a character named Amy who is like she's like perfect and doesn't do anything wrong almost any of the time, and she's my least favorite character for that reason. I like her, I mean, but if I had to rank everybody, like she's the least intriguing. So when I create characters, whether it's Kayla or Murphy from Dead End Kids, it's always like, how is this person broken? Like what is interesting about them? And like honestly, like I channel a lot of like myself in there. Like when I was younger, I was really angry. I was in a situation like a kid wouldn't really understand and doesn't have the tools to sort of deal with emotionally and mentally, and like you end up lashing out and being bitter about it. And that's a lot of what went into Murphy. So with Kayla, I had to sort of channel a little not me, because I've never been a recovering addict, and I've only sort of witnessed it sort of secondhand through people around me. But I sort of wanted, like, she's still a badass punk chick. So like I could get in the voice of somebody who doesn't necessarily give a fuck, or is ready to punch somebody in the face, like when they're pissed off. Like that's where I found my Intuit, because that's who I was for a long time. But yeah, it's she. I think that the fact that she is messed up and does these terrible things, but really tries and means well, and hopefully will do the right thing, makes her a layered character in a way that, like, your Obi-Wan Kenobis aren't. Like, Obi-Wan is, he's pretty straightforward. He's the good guy. He's the space wizard. He's a hell of a lot less interesting than Han Solo.
For the Mandalorian, right?
Yeah, well, I think Mando is a little too clean cut even, but I do like the show quite a bit.
Yeah. So the kind of astute observation that I think you intuitively sort of made with this character that I really like is this idea that not using drugs is simply not sufficient for her, right?
Yeah.
Healthy people don't engage in self-harm with drugs, or certainly not needle drugs. And then suddenly when people stop using IV drugs or crack cocaine or whatever sort of controlled substance, there's a real personality change, a real sort of change of behavior that is kind of essential and difficult for people in the recovery process. Can you talk a little bit about how we can anticipate that journey in this book? I mean, is that something we're going to see explored in the pages, or what?
Yeah, I can definitely get into that. So because this story is so inspired by Buffy, sort of structurally, I took not quite exactly a one-shot mentality to all the issues in the series, but each issue sort of stands on its own, like an episode of television. And you see her larger arc build over the course of several issues. And that's sort of the connective tissue more so than the plots of each issue. But each one is sort of like, peaks and valleys with her arc. Like, some things are setbacks, some things are things that sort of reframe how she's thinking about it. So the first issue specifically is about her sort of coming to terms with the fact that even if she's doing the right thing, she's doing it for the wrong reasons, for selfish reasons, and for reasons that aren't the ones that she should be focusing on if she wants to truly be a better person and be doing the right thing. The plot of the first issue is Kayla sort of going on a suicide mission against a gang of drug dealing vampires to rescue her friend, who is the person who helps her stay clean. And at the core of it is, she is not trying to save him because it's the right thing to do. She's trying to save him because she's afraid that she'll relapse without him. So like it's an example of her doing the right thing but for the wrong reasons, and kind of starting to recognize that that's not the way to go about this, and that's why she's not getting further down the road to where she wants to be.
It's fascinating. Do you think that your books are moral tales? I mean, are they moral stories?
No. I specifically write my stories not to take a side, or at least I try to. Like, I think I mentioned earlier that Dead End Kids explores a very specific question, and that I feel one way about it. But when the book was finished being written, its opinion differed than my own. Like, it became its sort of own sort of thesis on the idea of like how trauma affects you when you grow up. And No Heroine, like, just by virtue of the fact that it's this gray look at addiction, it doesn't take a side. It just sort of calls it like it sees it. There's a book called Speaker for the Dead. It's the sequel to Ender's Game. And the main character in the book is this guy who goes around the universe when people call for him, giving eulogies for other people who've died. And he takes this sort of private investigator approach to writing eulogies, where he'll sort of explore the person's life, investigate, find out all the fucked up shit they did, all the great things they've done. And then when he goes to give the eulogy, he sort of presents it sort of warts and all. Like it's a very fair, unopinionated view of like who the person was, and it leaves the people who hear it like to make their own judgments. Like I don't want to give any specific examples because it's too easy to get political. But just imagine, like, you found out like a billionaire who was a philanthropist was also a pedophile. And like in that eulogy, you got both sides of those arguments. And like then you're just sort of left to decide how you're going to feel. But that's sort of my approach to it. Like, I don't ever want to tell people how to feel about things because it's none of my fucking business. Like, it's not my right. My goal when I sit down to write is to make people feel something, like whether it's happy or sad or like a little bit of hope or something. And that's I don't know, it's a little woo woo and like, but like it's just the stories I love most. Like, I am not a crier. I am not somebody who feels emotion very strongly. So like it hits me extra hard. Like if I'm watching a movie and I get choked up or if or something like affects me like that. And that's the kind of thing I want to affect in other people. So that's what I want to do. Like, I don't want to tell people they're, what to think or believe. I want them to walk away having felt something.
Now, we talk a ton about the comic market, books that are hot, whether they're back issues or modern comics. Are you a collector?
Yeah, definitely. Less so than I did before I wrote comics, because as I mentioned, it's pretty expensive to write comics, let alone travel for cons and whatnot. But I collect certain things, and I still pull a few titles. I've got an almost complete run of Fantastic Four. I'm missing one issue, number 5, which is the first appearance of Doctor Doom. And then my number 2 first appearance of the Skrulls doesn't have a cover, so that's one I'm looking for, like an upgrade someday. I have.
You say I kind of collect. I just kind of collect. I've almost got a complete run of Fantastic Four.
Well, kind of meaning like selectively. Like, I love Fantastic Four. I was introduced to it by the Hickman run, which obviously is one of the best runs ever. And then I went back and read the Byrne stuff and the Stan Lee stuff, and I like, I don't know, maybe I'm a little weird, and I didn't grow up with a great family. Like, the idea of a family of superheroes really resonates with me. I don't know. But yeah, so I got that. I've got like a full run of The Crow first print, all signed by James O'Barr.
Wow.
Same with Kabuki. I've got some like key Avengers issues. Avengers is my next project when I finish Fantastic Four. I've got some Spider-Man keys. And I still have a pull list. Like, I'm pulling right now the Rosenberg Hawkeye Freefall run. I buy all the Power Ranger books from Boom. Like, I'm a sucker for nostalgia. Obviously, I wrote a book set in the 90s. I pull Fantastic Four. I pull Black Panther. I pull Iron Fist when it's, when there's series come out. Like, characters I like and resonate with me, I still pull. But there was a point where, like, when Civil War was happening, God, 15 years ago now, I pulled like all the issues of Civil War. Like, I've scaled back from that kind of collecting mentality.
It sounds like you collect comics very much in the same way that I do, at least these days. Because back when Civil War was coming out, let's just say that my discount comic book service bill was a little higher than I cared to admit.
Yeah. But you know what? I really appreciate people who do buy like that, because those tend to be the people who try new things. And as an indie creator, like, it's super important for people to check out books that sound interesting, because like, I don't get to work for Marvel if my books don't sell. Like, and then I don't get to write Civil War 3. Like, you guys, my fate is in your hands. Buy the books.
All right, so tell me a little bit. I kind of cut you off so that we could start the podcast, but I thought that your discussion of this was fascinating. We were talking about the state of the current market and how, for whatever reason, there's a lot of doomsaying about Marvel and DC generally, that sales are down or whatever. And you were talking about this emerging independent market, and if you would kind of continue that thought or elaborate on that idea, because I thought it was fascinating, your observations.
Yeah. So like imagine the comics industry as a pie, right? And let's say 5 years ago, let's imagine this. And you break up that pie across the top 10 publishers, right? And Marvel's got what 35% cut, and DC's got like 30% cut, and then the other, I'm terrible at math, was there's 35% left is Boom and Dark Horse and Dynamite and like the other like top 7 or 10 publishers. What's happened over the last 15 years and specifically like the last 10 years is the number of publishers has expanded, right? So now you've got your source point presses who are publishing people like me. You've got Ahoy, you've got a Wave Blue World, you've got oh god, there's so many. The Vault, and so it's not that the comics industry is shrinking, and that's why Marvel and DC's shares have dropped from 30 and 35 to 30 and 25. It's that the pie is getting divvied up into more pieces. I think Boom was, at least for a brief moment a couple of weeks ago, the number 3 publisher. It supplanted Image because of Once and Future and Something's Killing the Children. And then Vault, I think, moved into the top 7 in December for a brief moment. So like diversification and expansion of the number of publishers is making it so that, yeah, there's generally a finite number of readers and they have a finite number of money, and how they choose to spend their money determines which publishers are more successful. That's one part of it. The other part of it is the market is expanding in ways that it's not traditional. Like the direct market isn't necessarily expanding, but the comic book market as a whole is. The YA market is gigantic. Like, I mean, Dogman is a Scholastic book, I believe. That was the highest selling comic of 2019, and it sold more copies than X-Men #1 did in 1991. So like, it's not like people aren't buying comics and don't read comics. It's that where the comics are selling and the types of comics that are selling and who's selling them is all evolving, and it's evolving very fast. And this is generally good. Like, I mean, it fosters competition and innovation, and allows for new types of content to be out there. Like Dead End Kids wouldn't exist without a small publisher like Source Point Press. Same with No Heroine. You wouldn't be getting like the dope books that Boom is putting out if there wasn't competition in the market and a spot for Boom to come in and take a piece of that market. So like I can understand like why looking at the Marvel and DC numbers, like it might seem like the things are sort of in a tailspin or a slow death. But I mean, at least from where I'm sitting, working with a small publisher that is being incredibly successful over the last 5 years and growing and growing and growing, and talking with editors at different publishers over the last couple of years, like it's from where I'm sitting, the market is very healthy. But some of the behaviors in the market are having a negative impact. To call a spade, like speculation is it can be very harmful. I think of it this way, and this isn't a knock to speculators. Like I'm just saying it as it is. Dead End Kids came out last year, and there was a store in Maryland that called me at 8:00 in the morning my time when they opened on the East Coast to tell me that somebody came in and bought all 10 copies of Dead End Kids that they bought. This person was somebody who they identified as a flipper. Somebody was going to take them over to eBay and sell them, or sit on them and speculate and hope that like there was a movie or something. And what happened was they bought all 10 copies, and then the copies of #2 that they ordered couldn't sell. Because who's going to buy #2 of a comic series when they can't get their hands on #1? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So like, it's comics is an ecosystem, right? Like everybody has a role and a function in it. And if one part of the ecosystem either gets too big or too small, it throws everything out of whack. Like imagine if the salmon population dried up in Alaska and the bears had nothing to eat, right? Or if it got too big and like started eating too much of the food that they feed on, like it would throw everything out of whack. So when Marvel and DC do too many variant covers, it just saturates the market and forces retailers to buy too many copies of something that they can't sell, and it has an overall net negative effect. Or when speculators go crazy over a book and buy up all the copies of the #1 so that #2 and #3 can't sell, it's harmful to the publisher and the creator. Like we sold 7,000 copies of Dead End Kids #1, but we were only able to sell 3,000 copies or 3,000 and change of #3 because those 7,000 copies weren't divvied up across 7,000 people who wanted to read the book. And I know just from the trade sales that recently closed that there were that many people who wanted to check out the story. Like the trade sold really well in Diamond, and I'm confident that a lot of those people were people who couldn't get the issues, and this is how they're planning to read it. So like, I don't know. I do like speculators though. I think that it's an interesting angle and part of the market. I think that it's more moderated than it was in the 90s, and like people have better, faster information now. And I mean, I'm out here hustling, trying to tell people about my book, and I absolutely respect anyone who's out there hustling, trying to make a dollar their own way. I do wish, if I can get up in my soapbox and maybe, not purposely, but alienate a few people. I wish that more people who are interested in speculation did participate in pre-ordering comics. That's the backbone, right? A publisher puts a book out and solicits retailers or what they think they can sell. They get the books from Diamond through distribution, and then readers come buy the books. And if readers can't buy the books, it kills the rest of the series, which hurts the publisher, which hurts the creator. And it's just, comics aren't cheap to make. So if I don't make royalties on number 3, like that hurts. I can't make, Dead End Kids 2. And if you love Dead End Kids 1 and you really want Dead End Kids 2, like that situation doesn't help that happen. So like, I think what I was really excited to see Punchline over in DC Comics and Batman recently. Because if DC is going to do like a publicity stunt like that, like giving people a lot of warning, letting it come out before FOC so people can pre-order and take advantage of the pre-order system and really bump up the comics industry, I think that's a real net positive. And like everybody who buys comics for every reason can be taken care of. But some people just need to be a little more structured in how they participate and aware of like the negative effects of what they do is all. I don't know if that makes me sound like what I sound like, but that's just my take. Being an independent creator and sort of seeing my royalties checks and like the effect it has. Speculation is a tool. Like it's, you can build a house with a hammer, you can kill somebody with a hammer. Like it just depends on how you use it.
Don't worry, people will hate you just for being on this show. So don't feel bad. There's a lot of hard feelings in comics, like from all angles for all reasons. I don't really understand necessarily why, but I will say that this idea of a shared common purpose, that we are all within a community and really have call it moral, call it whatever, but basically a duty to one another is an idea that unfortunately has become, foreign or passé or just kind of ignored, and it's quite unfortunate. I wish that people would talk more about helping other members of the community either get their hands on comics, learn to become better collectors, sharper collectors. Find good stories, learn about like the history of comics, because for me, and I imagine for yourself too, when we were younger, what the hell was there? Wizard Magazine? Before that, Comic Buyer's Guide. Like there wasn't a lot of information, and now, you really had to engage in almost kind of like an apprenticeship with more experienced collectors to sort of like learn about comics. We were desperate to learn the origin of characters, for Christ's sake.
Thank God for Wikipedia.
Yeah, right. These days, it's a whole different ball game. Now, one of the things you talked about, which I think everybody's sort of acutely aware of, is the profound drop-off from issue 1 to other issues in the series. So you see Marvel and DC relaunching, right? They go from New 52 to Marvel now, you know what I mean? And that's sort of their solution. Well, fuck it, we'll just restart and do another one with seasoned, time-tested characters, and they're able to get their pop again. With independent comics, Dead End Kids sold more copies of the first issue than The Walking Dead did.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
And really, to be selling 3,000 copies of issue number 4. To me,
Issue
that's an
3.
accomplishment.
Yeah.
That's a hell of an accomplishment. But what I think, unfortunately, we've seen far too often is that people aren't reading comics, for one, and they're certainly not buying issues, sequentially, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And we've seen some, or at least one publisher now, try to explore the idea of going from issue 1 floppy straight to a trade paperback to sort of encourage people to read. Do you think that's an interesting idea, a smart move, something that we'll see more of? What's your sort of gut response to that?
So to answer the questions in order,
sorry,
it's definitely interesting. I work at a startup for my day job in technology. It's a small company. There's 13 of us. And I am the sole person in the marketing department, which has helped me tremendously in comics. But what we do is we try a lot of things. We experiment, we collect data, and we sort of like take a very structured scientific approach to things. And it lets us try lots of different sort of marketing experiments. Like right now we have a flatbed U-Haul truck, like with banners on the side with ads for the company driving down Highway 101 in California right now. Nice. to see if we can get some hits. And I think I'm all for any publisher who is willing to take a publishing sort of style risk, because I do think the model is a bit dated and it doesn't quite work. It's not the best option, even if I don't know what the better option is right now. So companies like TKO, who are doing sort of binge release or multiple options, like I'm paying a lot of attention to them. Bad Idea, which was just announced a few weeks ago. I'm very suspect of what they're doing. Like I can't imagine how it will work, but I'm excited to see it work and understand how it does, if it does. And then I think A Wave Blue World was the one you were sort of hinting at a minute ago with the floppy number 1 release straight to trade. One of their books, what the fuck's it called? Dead Legends by my buddies Gavin and James. That they did that model, and it was pretty successful for them in terms of pre-orders and sort of meeting the needs of the market. So like I definitely think it's interesting, and I'm paying a lot of attention to it, especially since at the publisher I'm at, SourcePoint Press, it's very easy for me to put ideas into the ring for initiatives and to affect some kind of change there. Whereas like if I was at a Marvel or a DC, like I'd have less power to get that stuff kind of moving. So I'm very interested. Will it work? I don't know. I'm sort of waiting with bated breath like everyone else. And then I can't remember the last question, but that's going to happen a lot. I'm sorry. I forget things.
No, you did a hell of a job. I didn't even realize I was asking so many questions, and I apologize.
Yeah, it's like 3 variations of one question and anyway, it's an interesting time in comics. And like, again, this is part of the market expansion, right? Like we live in times like things are changing, and the way we consume media has changed. Like Netflix changed everything. So it's, that's why I write shorter miniseries. Like 3 issues is easier to get out on schedule. It makes me have to ask people for less money. $12 is always easier to get out of somebody's wallet than $16 or $24 if you do a 6-issue mini. I am writing larger issues, generally like 24 and 26 and 28 page issues or story page issues, to make sure people get their money's worth. Because the 20 page Marvel comic is not always very satisfying. With my trades, Dead End Kids is coming out in a couple weeks, and the pre-orders just ended. I was adamant with SourcePoint Press that book be $10, not $15. Would I like to make $5 more on every book? Yeah, but I want the book to be accessible, and I want people to feel like they're getting their money's worth. And to get the trade cheaper than the actual single issues were at cover costs, I don't think there's another publisher doing that except Image on their first trades. So like I'm very lucky to be where I'm at and to sort of have the head on my shoulders that I do in terms of marketing knowledge and experimentation knowledge, and the people willing to work with me on trying these things, because I think the market is going to change a lot very quickly, and continue to change over the next several years. And I don't know that it'll ever settle into one shape again, because like we're, as consumers and people who use media, evolving so fast these days. I think the people who are leading the way and doing the most innovative things will come out on top. From where I'm sitting, I don't know that that's necessarily the people at the top right now.
So you touched on a lot of things that are really interesting. One is the number of properties that are being optioned for television and film, particularly independent titles. I mean, it's astronomical. Certainly, we've had like a history of violence and some other comic book properties that, unless you're a comic book lunatic like you and I, you weren't aware were comic book properties in the past. But I mean, I think there's 3 different IDW titles alone on Netflix in the last 90 days.
For sure.
Maybe more. I don't have to count, and that's wild for me. I mean, The Boys had people. I work with people who are like, "What's your Halloween costume going to be for your comic book show this weekend?" They may not necessarily say that, but that's sort of how they like envision what the comic book community is. And now all of a sudden, I've got people who've never collected comics, never read a comic, people who politely describe comic books as graphic novels, asking me about The Boy. And it's just, it warms my heart. I think we're going to see more and more attention from Hollywood, because comics do 2 things. They provide storyboards and focus groups, period, point blank.
100%.
In a way that, and that's never been done before. I mean, they've never sort of like appreciated that in a real sense until just recently, universally across the industry. Have you sort of been thinking ahead about what you see the future is for Dead End Kids in a television, serialized form on Amazon, or a future for No Heroine? I mean, do you secretly think about who you'd like to have cast as Kayla, your anti-heroine? I mean, are these things that you don't want to talk about, or?
No, I'll talk about it. The truth is that
I appreciate that.
I'm very, very uninterested in making movies and television shows. Like, don't get me wrong, if somebody wants to give me like $40,000 to option a thing and they're going to go off and do it, I'm happy to be involved and do it. But at the end of the day, like, if it never happens, I'm not going to lose any sleep. And I know that there are creators out there.
You're a cheap date. I want you to know that. $40,000, you're a cheap date.
For an indie book, that would actually be a lot. Like, I know some big properties that were optioned for several $1,000s, like not more than 10.
We should have started talking about this earlier. This breaks my heart.
Yeah, Bendis's first option on Powers was, I think, less than 10 grand. He ended up optioning it like seven times, and that's amazing because he just kept making money for doing nothing, and I'm super jealous. I'm not interested in it. I'm not going to turn away free money. And if it helps sell more copies of it, my main goal is to write stories that I'm proud of and to put them in people's hands and let them read them. And that's the only thing I want to focus on. There are definitely people in the industry whose sole purpose is, like, they're failed film writers who don't know how to get into Hollywood and want to use comics as a backdoor. And, to each their own. That seems kind of like disrespectful to me, disingenuous. Like comics is like something you can just ride into the better place on. I know people who I'm very close with who want to do all of it, like Garrett Gunn, who does Franklin and Ghost at Source Point Press with me. Garrett wrote Franklin and Gunn as a comic. It's being adapted into an animated series right now with Billy Bob Thornton attached as a voice. Sean Schemmel, who does the voice of Goku on Dragon Ball Z, is attached. And Garrett is very excited about like the idea of multimedia, and sort of watching him go through the process and talking with him about how it's all going is it's been really interesting. And I'm paying attention because like you never know. I will say that I've had conversations with producers in New York and LA about Dead End Kids. I'll also say there's no ink on any contracts or anything, and no one's filming anything behind the scenes right now. Like that's just the honest God truth. But yeah, like I don't know. I love comics. I want to make comics. I want to put comics in people's hands. So I haven't like done any sort of fantasy casting or written specifically for things like to be made to be adaptable. I think by virtue of the kinds of stuff I write, like sort of things that don't have like huge budgets, like sci-fi, monster alien kind of robot fight book, you could very easily film and create Dead End Kids as like an 8-episode Netflix show for very little money. There's no special effects, child actors. Like, I mean, it's almost as if I did do it for the purpose of being adapted, but I didn't. I'll tell you, I've said this to a couple of other of the podcasts, so I might as well let you know, since I think your fans and audience will be more interested than most people. Dead End Kids 2 is coming, and it'll be out in November if all goes according to plan. And that's about as much as I can say about it. I just finished writing the first draft. But it's definitely a better story than the first one. So if people dug the first one, like, I think that the second one's going to be a big kick in the nuts, like in a good way.
That's fantastic. And I'm thrilled. Yeah. You just made my whole day.
Yeah,
my birthday's in November. So hopefully we can figure out how to make sure that's a Wednesday or a Tuesday. And I can get it on my birthday.
Yeah, well, listen, if I have copies early, I can make sure you get it on your birthday, as long as your birthday is
a kind soul. A kind soul. Yeah, super exciting. So that means we can probably expect No Heroine to not be a story that dies on the vine. We're going to continue to get, if it's as well received as I anticipate, you anticipate, and others. That's not one that's just going to wrap up neatly in a bow, never to be told again.
I'll say it like this, I guess. When I originally envisioned the story, it had a hard ending, like that was irreversible. It would make it very hard to write myself out of that corner to do more of it. But when I was writing it, I ended up adoring Kayla so much that I didn't want to close off the door completely. So it's possible. I do have my next 3 years worth of books planned in some form of like production, whether it's like, figuring out the plot or writing the script, or it's the art being done like while we're talking. So that one would be a ways away, unless like it was if it hit like Walking Dead levels and like we needed more as a publisher. I do have a story waiting, but it's not like a high priority, and I don't like to rush things. Like doing Dead End Kids 2 this fast was something that I felt comfortable with. I had the story that I knew I wanted to tell already. I wouldn't just say, hey, this book was successful, let's do more of it so we can make some more money. Like that's not who I am. Like if No Heroine's a big success, like unless it's like crazy big, like I wouldn't expect to see more of it for a while, but you never know. Like I don't know today what's going to happen tomorrow.
Well, with your trajectory, I'm sorry if I'm the first one to tell you, there's a risk that it could be super big.
Like I said, like the Dead End Kids kind of blew up on me, and it was like a kind of terrifying experience, just because like it was bigger than I was ready to handle, and I had to sort of adapt on the fly really quickly. And like that sounds all very dramatic and like, oh, boohoo, you had a hit book. But I mean, like having retailers call you for several weeks to get copies of a book when you're not the distributor is like, borderline harassment almost. And I wasn't used to people asking me for things, especially things I couldn't give them. But listen,
high quality problems, I like them.
Yeah, no, I mean, terrified in a good way, good problem to have. Like I'm not upset about it, but it's sort of like I guess like being a parent. Like I'm not a parent yet, and hopefully I will be one day, but I got to imagine like the stress of having a newborn is kind of terrifying, right? It's a great thing. Like it's, brought life into the world and it's exciting, but like, you also don't know what the fuck you're doing. And like, you have to figure it out as you go. Like there are plenty of instruction manuals for it, but like, are there though? Like, are they really like what you need to be doing? I don't know. And in comics, there's definitely no rule book. So like, again, I sounded like I was complaining, but I'm super grateful that people love the book. I will take calls from retailers all day, every day for the rest of my life if they want my book and they're going to put it into people's hands. Because like I keep saying it, like that's the point for me. I want people to read my shit.
Sweet. I am super grateful that you joined me today. And on behalf of comicbookspeculation.com, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, not just for being here, but for the work that you do. Thank you for sharing these stories with our community. It means a lot to many of us who not only enjoy your work, but your perspective on comics and the market. We appreciate that it's a labor of love, and it means a lot to us that you would be willing to share those kinds of personal stories with us. Before we go, and I know I promised you I'd keep you hostage for an hour, but before we go, if there's anything at all that you'd like to talk to our listeners about, and specifically if you would let people know where they can find you, either on social media, how they can get a hold of Source Point Press to the extent that they're retailers watching this show for variant covers or whatever it may be. Please let us know. The more information, the better.
Yeah. So let me take those one at a time. If there's one thing like anyone takes away from this interview, and this is the time to pay attention, like this is the one thing. I walked through this a little bit earlier, but I'm gonna reiterate it and sort of expand a little bit. If you hear about a dope book, if you hear about No Heroin, if you hear about Ogre, if you hear about the plot over at Vault, if you hear about Dead Legends over at A Wave Blue World, and you sounds like a book that you think you're gonna like, pre-order that shit. Like pre-order comics. It is the backbone of this industry. It is the way everybody wins. You get the book you want. Retailers are profitable and don't have to close. Publishers are able to stay in business and keep making awesome books that aren't, the 100th version of Daredevil versus the Hand. And creators get royalties so they can make more awesome comics. None of that happens. No one wins if we don't pre-order comics. It's like so crucial. And I understand like there are people who don't do this for the stories, and like that's fine. You have a place in the community, but understand like what the consequences of that are. If speculators don't pre-order comics and they buy up all the comics, and people who read comics get frustrated and don't buy comics anymore, the comics industry is going to collapse. Like it happened almost in the 90s, and I wouldn't say we're getting there, but like there are a lot of people, especially retailers, who are extremely worried about this. And it's, the writing is on the wall, and like we have a long view down the hallway, and like we have to purposefully walk away from it. And this is all very doomsayer sounding. Just look. If you like the sound of No Heroin, check this out. I'll show you guys the cover in person. I've got a real life copy of it. If you like this cover, if you like the idea of the story, just pre-order it. Like, just go to your shop, say, hey, I want that vampire book from Source Point Press, No Heroin, that Frank Gogol book, like whatever. Just go pre-order it. Like, it makes all the difference in the world, and you still get the book, and you don't have to like worry about like hustling your ass down to the shop at 11 o'clock on Wednesday to try and score one. You're gonna have one. So that all said, if you want to hear more of this soapbox or any of my other random thoughts on comics, which I have a lot of, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. For Twitter and Instagram, it's just my name, one word, at Frank Gogol, FrankGogol. I love Instagram. I try to post like really high quality content. I do a lot of design work, and I'm pretty proud of what I got going on over there. Twitter's growing on me. It seemed like a cesspool for a long time, but sort of it's coming into its own with me. And then, like I said, I'm on Facebook. I don't have a fan page because I'm not like crazy arrogant person, and they also suck and they don't work. But if you want to shoot me a friend request because you saw this interview and you thought I was awesome, or if you thought No Heroin was awesome, or if you want to talk shop, or if you are a person who would like to be a creator someday and you need to pick somebody's brain, shoot me a friend request. Like if as long as you don't have like a swastika in your profile picture, like I'll say okay, and we can connect, and that's cool with me. If there's one place I can highly recommend connecting with me, it's my newsletter. And the top of all my social media, there's a link to sign up for my newsletter. It comes out every 2 weeks. It's sort of a distilled look at everything I've got going on. That we do exclusives for it. There was a Dead End Kids exclusive variant for newsletter subscribers only last year. I've been talking about No Heroin in there for over a year. So like there's really, really advanced looks at like what's going on behind the scenes. And there's definitely a lot to talk about these days. And it's also just a way for me to easily get information to you. Like, there's no algorithm, like it just hits your inbox and it's there and you get to read it. Like, there's no likes necessary for it to, cross your feed or whatever that bullshit is. So yeah, like any of those is fine. I highly recommend the newsletter. If you want to keep up with SourcePoint Press, they're on social media too. It's usually at SourcePoint Press. On Twitter, it's Source PT Press because of the character limit. They've got a website, sourcepointpress.com. There's a store on there where you can check out like pretty much all their stuff except for my books because they're like chronically sold out. Thank you, by the way. Yeah, like just support indie comics, pre-order your shit, and like just be generally awesome to one another. Don't be a dick. Like that's, and we'll all be fine.
Thank you so much for your time, Frank. It means a lot to me. I'm probably screwing. Oh, there we go.
I'm zooming in and out, and it's amazing. Just giving me vertigo.
Yeah.
Well, you said thanks. You said thanks to me, but I really do have to point out that I don't get to sell comics and tell people about them without people like you putting on these podcasts and any of the other 50 that I'm going to do for No Heroin. You're doing me a favor. Like I'm here. It's my Saturday night too, but like, this is a platform for me to talk about my stuff, for people to get to know me better. And I super attribute like this kind of exposure for myself as one of the reasons Dead End Kids did so well. So thank you. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me.
An honor and a privilege, my friend. An honor and a privilege.
Indeed.
Thanks.